I was listening to my own video that I made yesterday and sort of maybe catching myself in some assumptions that I hadn't tested in a while. And I was like, okay, time to go test those, see if I'm actually right still or have things changed. I told people, right, basically advised them to expose to the right when you're scanning. Uh, that was definitely good advice like 10, 15 years ago. Um, but I went through a series of tests today, trying to figure out if I'm really scanning the best that I can. I cover camera exposure, the color of the light source, white balance settings, aperture, focus spot, image stabilizer. And then I get to an endpoint, I'm going to compare it to where I got yesterday and just see if all this effort made any difference. So, right, I kind of went through this morning, and I don't, right, I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, more just the outline and sort of the conclusions. But here you can see, right, I chose 4 different exposures, right? So this is, if you look over here to my histogram, right, I'm exposed way to the left. Here was one where sort of still to the left. Here was more of a even spread, right, kind of using the almost the full width there. And then I did a pretty far exposed to the right. And to my surprise, okay, here's all 4 of them after I've inverted and just made some basic exposure adjustments. That the only one that isn't really hanging out with the others is the one where I exposed way to the right. This one in the bottom right. You can kind of tell that it doesn't have, the shadows are sort of are dead. And it's especially apparent when I sort of flatten the contrast and scrunch all the values toward the middle just to kind of see, right, what's available to me for editing. And let me get to 100% here. Right, sort of the one where, I mean, look at this. The difference here is I use a 1/2000th of a shutter, 1/500th, 1/100th, and 1/25th. Everything else was the same. So I'm really spreading out the exposures. And what I'm surprised by is how well this way exposed to the left is actually doing here. The camera is a Leica SL2-S, which, you know, is a pretty common sensor, and just sort of right up to current standards for a digital scanning camera. I don't know how much it represents all cameras. Like, I know that, and again, here I am off into assumptions, right? But Leica tends to clip highlights a little bit sooner than maybe others. And maybe that's what I'm seeing here, right? Is when I got too far exposed to the right, I'm starting to getting into some tone clipping in the shadows, right? Which are really the highlights because this is inverted. So now I feel like I have to sort of, I don't think it changes my position on sort of what I was doing, which was like gentle exposure to the right. But there is sort of this thing of like, you got to be careful not to go way too far. And so I sort of settled in with, right, the reason I stayed away from this really far exposed to the left is my choice, is getting it back to sort of this middle point required a ridiculous amount of adjustments and kind of gave me no more room to play. So then just sort of figuring that really it's a pretty big window of quality, of high quality, of anywhere between sort of like right, a little bit of exposure to the left, kind of in the middle, and you can even go to the right, just stay clear of your clipping. And the sort of the window of high quality is pretty darn big. But I settled in with sort of kind of a middle exposure. And then it came down to a question of, the next one was, what about the light color of coming out of my my light source? It has an adjustable color from cool to warm. So then here I've got, in the top left is the coolest temperature, and then as we progress, I warm up the light to its warmest settings. And the quick takeaway is that I don't really see a difference. It's nothing major. I've got the white balance set to flash, and warming up the light does make it a little bit, just like a little bit darker, right? It's the brightest light towards the blue direction. But in terms of like sharpness and contrast and detail, it's super subtle, if anything. So I'm going to end up choosing the bluest light, and the reason is it just happens to be where my red channel, green channel, and blue channels all have pretty equal participation. And all that is doing is sort of creating a nice overlap of my color channels here, as opposed to like something like this. I just start getting more, right, just like 3 different color channels that are in different spots. And if I just pay attention to the luminance values, like, it's fine, but it's really just like a very, very minor, just like, this is kind of nice that they just sort of all overlap for editing's sake. But I don't really see a difference here for the color temperature. I'm just gonna, it's like I'm afraid to say that and then see something. But yeah. So the next, I wanted to check my aperture setting. I'm using the Sigma 70 2.8 art lens L mount, and I've done this test before, and I've been really happy with like 5.6, 6.3, 7.1, but I did actually get a different result this time. And I think I'm going to believe my new result. So f4 is kind of clearly the least sharp, especially when I start moving around the image and checking different spots. So f4 is off the table. 5.6 here, this is 5.6. It is hanging in there with the others. I've got 5.6, 8, 11, 13, and 16 in the center. But if I start to kind of move around and just check different pockets, again, it's pretty close, but 5.6 is not quite keeping up with some of the smaller apertures. Right, if I'm just looking at grain, right, we gotta look at grain. The grain is definitely has better definition, kind of the further we go, maybe not to f16. It's good to kind of check your 4 corner areas, your center, a couple midpoints. Is 5.6 good? Yeah, it's really good. Is it the best? Not quite, right? So I think, again, f16, we don't have to look at it too much. It starts to fade away just a hair. So really, it's kind of falling into these 4, and we're not going to spend too much time here, but sort of what I found is that 5.6 didn't quite hang out. And then it came down to f8, f11, and f13. And surprisingly, the more I looked at this, f13 was actually like the place where my grain really is showing up the best. So then 5.6 loses, and it comes down to f8. What is it? f11, or I guess that was f8. f11 and f13. Again, right, it's all about grain sharpness at this level. So those are, as I kind of check across the negative, those are both looking really good. But again, the more time I spent with this and sort of checked all over, I sort of gave the win to f13, right? So basically 5.6 to f13 were all really, really good. But I think f13 was the best. So that's what I'm going to try for a while. Okay, then next up was, what about where I focus on the image, the center, sort of a midpoint, down the diagonal, towards the corner, towards the edge, right? It's sort of like a good just place to be focusing on the negative. And I found that the center focus was the best. It sort of makes sense that if a negative can sort of have tilt and shift and kind of be off axis, and if you focus on the center, you're sort of most likely to be minimizing kind of the maximum distance away from the focal plane. So I don't think I'm going to go through those. They were all actually really good except for like a deep corner focus. And then I tried image stabilization on and off, and I was really surprised that it didn't matter, because with my other cameras, it definitely mattered, and image stabilization needed to be off. But here they were identical. And then the last thing I did was I compared where I got to with sort of my new knowledge and where I got to yesterday. Sort of curious, like, I spent an hour trying to figure this out. Did it help me? And so, right, the top one is what I got yesterday, and then the bottom one is my new result. And it's an easy answer. The bottom one is a better scan. It also has, like, the grain is showing up more, and it's sharper, and I want that. So, and I guess I say that because, like, I want to see my grain, and if there's something I don't like about my grain, I want to address that with my film and developer and exposures. Right? I want my scans to show me really what's there. I have no sharpening applied. Okay, so to recap, for the Leica SL2-S with a Sigma 70, my exposure, the exposure range that worked was really quite wide, but I sort of went with like either a middle exposure or a little bit of an exposed to the right, just a little bit. Definitely staying clear of clipping. My light color source, that really didn't matter. I went with just sort of kind of almost a random choice of a cooler light. It's a little bit brighter. Puts my color channels together. White balance setting, I didn't actually talk enough about that, right? I can just sort of toggle here. So let's go to just this image. Right, I was shooting it set to flash, and I did try like daylight, cloudy, etc. And the one that I liked best was setting it to flash. And I have that set in my camera and on Capture One. So yeah, white balance setting is for flash. The aperture, right? I think at least 5.6, and then I think the f13 was actually the sharpest, kind of all the way across the frame. So I'm gonna do that for a while. Image stabilization, it doesn't really matter. I might I don't know. I got to decide. I'm gonna leave it off for battery, or am I gonna leave it on just in case I don't know, something gets bumped? Would it help? I don't know. I might try it on for a little bit and just see. Focus spot. I'm gonna focus in the middle of the image, and then yeah. All right. So I kind of do this once every 4 or 5 months. I sort of go back over all my scanning procedure and settings and sort of make sure I like what I'm doing. So I'll be back again in 4 months. Take care.